Councilmember Spears,
Here.
Councilmember Anderson,
Here.
and the chair is here. Before we get started, I want to turn it over to John Joy, who's got an update for us about some things that we're going to be voting on, some new things that the legislature has just sent out to us. So, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. Members of council, you may remember at the last meeting, I was advising you that literally the governor had just that Monday signed a bill that provided a good number of things, relief for the pandemic response. It did several things, but primarily it affected our public meetings and our public hearings. It put in some new legislation about remote meetings. I also advised that while it required us to accept written comment for 24 hours after a public hearing, that I was comfortable that a vote could be had at that public hearing. Since then, the School of Government has come out with 2 articles that disagree with me. We are having quite the disagreement around the state, but given the School of Government's position, I would recommend that the city use the safe harbor of you have the first vote, assuming it's an ordinance, most of them will be, you can have the first vote then, but hold second reading until the next meeting. That will give us time to get any comments that come in for 24 hours, and we certainly will share them with council. And if council is inclined to do something different at its second reading, it certainly can, and we will be in full compliance with the School of Government's reading of this new law. In the event that a public hearing does not have an ordinance that has a resolution, I would ask you to hold that vote until the next meeting on the resolution. And I say this because the new law that the governor signed says that we have to accept written comment for 24 hours after a public hearing is held. And if you're thinking, well, hold on, doesn't that set up a endless loop upset bid situation? If we consider that late occurring information, doesn't that reopen the public hearing? That is exactly the point that I have made to the bill drafter and to the School of Government at this point. We're working through it. I hope that we'll have a little bit of legislative correction on the horizon, but I don't know for certain.
May I ask a question? Why would you need to do that on a resolution when generally that's not a public hearing?
It generally is not. I'm trying to think of when a resolution is. I just wanted to cover that in case one popped up. The alley naming that we have is a public hearing that's not required by law, but our policy requires that. And I'm trying to remember if that's a resolution or an ordinance.
It's a public hearing.
Public hearing.
It's an ordinance. So Mayor Pro Tem, that issue may not come up at all.
Mr. Grady?
Isn't the bottom line is that we just not going to be waiving second reading?
Correct.
Okay, anybody else? All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and get right into the agenda. C1 is approval of the minutes. C2 is a resolution for the acceptance of the Windermere and Teal Street drainage easements. C3 is a resolution authorizing the award of task order number 1 of on-call contract to LJB Incorporated in the amount of $106,085.26 for the design of the 17th Street Sidewalk Improvements Project and the Dawson Street Pedestrian Improvement Projects at both 16th and 17th Street. This was in the transportation bond. Yes, sir.
Staff has a brief presentation of that.
Okay. Staff.
What was the question? Or what was the statement?
Staff has got a presentation on this particular item, Charlie.
No, thank you.
You got it. Staff here to make the presentation. Okay. Yeah. Let's go.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Matt Hypes of the Engineering Department will present this item.
Somebody's got a mic on. Could you mute if we're hearing some background noise from somebody?
And we're hearing a TV.
There's a TV or something going on.
Yes.
17th and Dawson, please.
Controlling it, okay. You all set? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. It's good to see you all here today. We do appreciate the opportunity to present this project. This is the 17th Street sidewalks and intersection improvements at Dawson at 16th Street and 17th Street intersections. The overall outline of the presentation includes a view of the project area, a discussion about the significant improvements or significance of the improvements, the existing conditions, some of the coordination we've been doing with New Hanover County, the project timeline, and then I can address any questions. This is the overall aerial map of the project area. The intent of this project is to create a continuous sidewalk from Wooster Street along 17th Street down to Greenfield Street. That's where some of the recent construction at the Department of Social Services occurred. There's also significance of the improvements. We are combining 3 of the voter-approved transportation bond projects. That not only includes the extension and gap fill of the sidewalks along 17th Street, it also includes the pedestrian actuated signals and crosswalks at Dawson at 16th and 17th Street, where there currently aren't any located. This will connect neighborhoods, commercial areas, and medical offices throughout the 17th Street corridor. It'll also establish a safe standard sidewalk away from a busy travel lane edge, and we'll talk about that in more depth in a couple slides. And it'll also provide a unique look for the users into the history of this area. These are some of the existing conditions where we need to extend the sidewalk. The upper left corner is the view from the railroad crossing, CSX railroad crossing, looking to the south. We will make some improvements right there where the sidewalk crosses. As you know, CSX was in here, I believe, last year and made some improvements at the crossing, but we will need to work with them for the sidewalk portion of it. Yeah, if you go back to the other slide. The lower right is a view from the Greenfield Street where the Department of Social Services is. A new crosswalk was installed there last year with pedestrian signals, and that creates the other boundary, southern boundary of this project. If you could just take a look at a couple of these pictures and keep them in mind when we go to the next slide, but this is the view on 17th Street with the busy traffic through there and very little room on either side for the pedestrians to walk through there. It's sloped and right against the busy travel lane. The right-hand photo there is a coordination meeting we had on a New Hanover County property, and we'll talk about that more on the next slide. So the overall coordination with New Hanover County, in that corridor that you saw, the sloped wooded area, is a historic Oak Grove Cemetery property that's owned by New Hanover County. Both sides of the road there are part of this historic cemetery that was established back in the 1870s. I believe they stopped activity there in the 1950s when the 17th Street extension was built through there. Multiple graves that were in the footprint of the road extension were relocated, but within the right-of-way on those bank slopes that you see in the previous pictures, there are still graves located there. In 2018, New Hanover County declared or provided a declaration preserving the site as a burial grounds so there are no future developments without any permission or relocation of graves without permission of the Board of Commissioners. So along those lines, the standard city sidewalk is just not feasible along the edge of the busy street there. Currently, there's a small goat path where you can see pedestrians have walked there. And in order to try to install a sidewalk, you'd have to put a retaining wall or an elevated walkway with foundations, which would also potentially disturb graves. We have worked extensively last year with New Hanover County. They actually have a strong interest in providing a historical education opportunity. Many people who drive through that area are not even aware that there is a historic cemetery there, which includes thousands of Wilmingtonians that have been buried there. So what we did was we have some historic maps of the cemetery that show the old meandering paths through it, which none of the graves are located. And we were able to overlay our proposed sidewalk alignment on there to determine the best way to align the path through there. We are also looking, since it is a wooded area and a little bit off the edge of the right-of-way, we will be providing a lighted walkway through that area with the future sidewalk, and also looking at a potential connection to the rear apartment complex to provide more connectivity and travel through that area. And the New Hanover County continues to maintain that area on a regular basis, keeping it a nice, pristine wooded area, and the brush cut back to keep it safe in the future for users. This is an interesting map that I thought might be helpful to you. The red line is the 17th Street extension that was done back in the 1960s. This map is from the 1940s of the Oak Grove Cemetery. You can see where 17th Street had previously stopped, and on either side of the road is part of the Oak Grove Cemetery. The reason why we're looking to build this sidewalk on the east side, you can see there's many more options to work with the historical meandering paths through there to stay off the top of any of those graves. And it also gets us further along where we can come out the other side and return back to the edge of the right-of-way safely. There is also on the east side of that road, the map doesn't show it here, there's significant grave documentation of where those graves are located. On the west side there, it's not as well documented. And overall, we just think that is a safer route to send the pedestrians. Just a real high level project timeline. So the planning is complete, as we talked about, with the locations of the intersection improvements at Dawson Street and the alignment of the sidewalk. I do want to thank Fred Royal. He's now with Stormwater Services, did a lot of coordination with New Hanover County. Design and permitting stage, that's the phase that we're entering now, and that is the subject of one of the items on the council agenda tomorrow night, to award the design contract. The expected completion of that is the spring of 2021. There are some coordination issues with NCDOT for the encroachment and the signal agreement. There will be some state historical review to go through the historic graveyard, and also CSX coordination. So you can see that will take some time. We do propose a public meeting in the fall, this coming fall, once we have more information, and the expected completion will be spring of 2022. And I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, can you go back to the that 17th Street extension, and where you were saying, like, now, is the way you can point out where you were talking about, like on this side of the graves and that side, or what you were saying?
Sure.
I got kind of.
Yeah, it's the area is on the top there. So what we would do is be coming from the 17th Street side on the left side of the map, and we will be using those paths on top there, the established paths that were through the graveyard, to be able to construct our sidewalk on top of that and avoid being on top of any current graves out there. That's a critical coordination point. There are no markers of the graves or tombstones. Many of those were removed back in the 60s and 70s and brought to another location, I believe at a Flemington cemetery that's up on the other side of the river, on up 421. So it's critical to coordinate with the county and make sure we stay on those paths.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item C4 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to apply for a 2019 Assistance to Firefighters Grant Fire Prevention and Safety in the amount of $96,800. The $91,960 is the grant and $4,840 is the match for year 2021 general fund budget. C5 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to apply for a coronavirus supplemental funding solicitation in the amount of $234,749.
Can I ask a question on that, sir?
Yes, you can.
What exactly would be, I mean, exactly, can you go into a little more detail on that?
Yes, sir. Chief Williams is here and I think he can address this item.
Chief Williams?
Good morning. My name is Matt Fox. I am one of Chief Williams's lieutenants, specifically over professional development. The grant writing project runs through my house, so I'd be more than happy to attempt to answer any kind of questions you might have about the item.
Mr. Offenbark has a question.
Well, I was just, how will it be implemented? I mean, is just, how will it be used? I've read the details on it. I was just wondering, how soon this can happen. Where does this come from? What will it be using it for?
Yes, sir. And I will touch on most of the items here. We have been allocated as a municipality $234,749 as part of to address concerns with the pandemic. PPE supplies, equipment supplies, anything that we might need to address with the COVID response. Specifically, what we have listed here, some of the items are multi-use items. They are things that we can use not only for this, but we'll have additional uses going forward, so that we're not stuck with something that was a one-time use thing. To start off at the top, we're asking for, you'll see the number 7 on here. Chief Williams's idea is to develop 7 SUVs for our patrol division, kind of a multi-use, be able to respond quickly. They'll already be on the street to any kind of a crowd or an exposure or anything like that. So you'll see the number 7 on here. We're asking for 7 AEDs, external defibrillators. The next item down would be 7. I'm going to call it a large medical kit, mass casualty medical kit that will have PPE, gloves, masks, bleeding control devices for these SUVs. The next one down, which is a fairly large item, is individual first aid kits for all of our officers for $300. Those run about $115. It's not that we're not providing some level of first aid kit to our officers now, but this would certainly be an upgrade. And so this would be a way for us to, I guess, divert a cost that we're already paying for our officers to provide them a bleeding control and PPE and place it under the coronavirus grant. And it would definitely be an upgrade over what they have now. Next item down is a decontamination kit. That's fairly self-explanatory. If we have officers that have an exposure, it gives us, if you can imagine a small field hospital where we can set up a tent and decontaminate them on the scene, the last thing we would want them to do is get back in their car, come back in the station, and now we have to decontaminate that also. The portable toilet would go along with the mobile command post. The 7 all-band radios with installation, that would be an expense to upgrade the 7 Interceptor SUVs. Generator, there would be generators to go along with that, and then also one for the tent. Drones, which would be the next, probably one of the higher items, is for crowd management, to be able to observe and communicate with any kind of a large crowd while still maintaining social distances. And that's definitely one of those multi-use options. It would not specifically just be for maintaining crowds or communicating with crowds. We could use those. Surely you've seen some of Chief Williams's footages of crime scene management, that type stuff. So in a lot of situations where you might traditionally want to use our Sable helicopter, but they're not able because of the ceiling or because of weather conditions, we could certainly use those drones. Plus, they're going to already be out there on the street, so it'd be a very quick turnaround. The sterilization chamber is designed to go with our decontamination tent, and that would be a great way for us to, for each officer to decontaminate and sterilize their N95 mask, their own personal PPE, without having to dispose of it. So that's kind of a multiplier when it comes to saving our PPE equipment. The handheld surface sterilizers would be for same thing, but not designed for the tent. That would be for sterilizing the individual officers' patrol cars. You can imagine placing someone in your back seat and then come to find out after you've turned them loose that they might have had potentially an illness. So that would give us a great way to sterilize all the surfaces in there. Another generator for the portable toilet, and then 2 portable message boards. We've all seen these. These are the traffic trailer type message boards where we can, for instance, not only use them to remind people to use social distancing, keep, you limit how many people are coming in or out of a venue, but also use them for redirecting traffic, use them for any forms of the parade or the festivals that we have. 2 portable camera towers. These are unmanned camera towers that are also portable in the event that we were having to deal with some form of a protest or something. That we would have the ability to set up the camera towers, and they would feed in through various means remotely, just like we would any of our downtown cameras. And then 1 additional generator to use with the decontamination tent. I don't know if that was clear as mud or all, but I'll be more than happy to try to clear that up.
The reason I ask is what is on our resolution is kind of like just the bare minimum, and I knew there had to be more at that amount. So you told me what's in it, and it's a great deal more than what we have listed on our agenda, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Neil.
Lieutenant, I wonder if you could revisit the drones a little bit, just from this. You have all folks all over the map with that sure, track me, know where I am, and other people are like, I don't want to keep my world as private as possible.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we have 2 different sets of citizens and a lot of people in between. So I'm just curious, the various uses you think, I mean, obviously over time, 20 years from now, that might be patrol cars that are drones. But I mean, right now,
Exactly.
This is going to be new to people.
Exactly.
So I think some will want to be reassured for how they're going to be used and how they're not going to be used. So I wonder if you could just address that.
Yeah, exactly. And so 20 years ago, we would have thought it was crazy for police officers to have a computer in their car, or for you to have a computer that fits in your pocket that can access the internet. This is the way that the world is going. Technology is advancing at light speed sometimes. So the big uses, the one assurance I can tell you, there's no warrant exemption for drone space or anything like that. So anything that you would be conducting a search with would fall under the same guidelines that we already do operate. So to alleviate anyone's fear, like the police are going to use drones to fly over my property and look in my windows. No, not unless it's at the order of a judge. But larger agencies all over the country are getting into the realm of drone use over the past several years for, let's imagine that the police were chasing a car and it crashed in the woods, and now we're searching for somebody. One option would be to send officers after an armed subject into a dark and scary place, not knowing what they're going into. Another option might be to fly a drone safely overhead and try to locate them that way. So it does provide us with a lot of safer options for doing many of the routine things that we do now. But as far,
how many was it? How many were you hoping?
seven, sir.
So I
Seven.
think that's probably the part that people are like, because I think you mentioned crowds, all this stuff makes sense. You know, you got a scene like Sable. We have one Sable.
Exactly.
You know, so that sounds almost like a small little
It's an army of drones. Yeah,
they're going to
absolutely.
be riding around everywhere, you know, and
so,
I know that's probably not reality, but you can see how.
Right. Yeah, and that's probably just an education burden on what we will be using it for. They're not going to have the ability to disperse chemicals or drop anything, and obviously, you know, any of that. These are simply for observation and communication. They have to fly under the, you know, they fall under all the FAA regulations. They have to stay under 400 feet. You can't fly them over a crowd unless you have a very specific emergent situation, which is, I mean, we would, like anything else with our Sable program, certainly abide by all the FAA regulations and all the legal standards. I can tell you as a, you know, I just came off of nights as a watch commander not long ago. There are many instances where we really do need to use our Sable helicopter, but because of the weather conditions, the ceiling, we're just not able to put them up. So this would give us, I guess, a supplemental way to augment our Sable program that's already in place. And the 7 of them, the specific number 7 would be for these 7 multi-use SUVs that we're going to allocate for our patrol division.
So it's a self-training thing. I mean, you're going to have.
Oh, no. So any one of the operators goes through a training program through the manufacturer and through the FAA, and you know, we certainly have policies governing that, you know, its use.
All right, thank you.
The question I have is, when I read this, one of the things that jumped out at me was the time-sensitive nature, because, you know, you state that if we don't pass this, we'll lose the funding. My question is, since you do all the grants, are there any other grants out there that are time-sensitive that you guys are working on or that we need to apply for that you're aware of?
Not pertaining to the pandemic response, and not in the immediate future. This one, I mean, I hate to say it, but in discussing with our grant folks, this has the smell of a stimulus package for municipalities, specifically the police departments. So it's a no match grant. The money is allocated to us. What we need to do is get our grant application in on time, and it's ours.
And there's no more money out there like that. That's why I'm just curious.
Not that I'm aware of, not in the immediate future. Now, as soon as I say that, that could very easily change with Congress over the next the next week. But right now, this is what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. And last thing, the thing that we read says that you're going to do 8 drones, not 7.
I'm sorry, I was confusing my numbers. I'm referencing 7 SUVs. The 7 of those drones would go to those SUVs, and then 1 additional one would be simply assigned to our Sable unit.
All right, thanks.
I'm sorry, I misquoted that number.
That's okay.
So would it be possible for somebody on staff to get us a list that you read off, sir? Because here again, we've got a very limited list of items. I'd like to see what I haven't seen that, sir.
Yeah, we can certainly facilitate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Public hearings, Ph1 is an ordinance in the matter of naming an unnamed alley off of North 23rd Street between Chestnut Street and Princess Place Drive, a public access referred to as Alley 41 for city maintenance purposes to Aussie Alley. This was continued from our May 5th meeting. Any questions about this?
I have one. John, the comments you had at the beginning of the meeting, we continued this public hearing from 2 weeks ago to tomorrow night. Are we going to be able to act tomorrow night, or is it going to be drug out for 2 more weeks? Or whenever we meet again?
It's going to be drug out for 2 more weeks. And the reason being is the public hearing had to be held open, and we can still receive that. So the public hearing isn't closed, meaning we have the 24 hours after comments that we have to accept.
Understood. Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir.
Question? Where did the name Alley 41 come from? Because the name seemed to be the big issue last time.
Do we have a staff person to address that issue, please?
Mr. Brian Scott, our IT director, will address this item.
Brian?
That is a very good question. I have no idea. I believe that we probably,
Well, let's find out.
I believe we went through all the alleys throughout the city and we just assigned them alley numbers throughout, but I will find out for tomorrow night.
Yeah, I think.
Certainly could. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Margaret, go ahead.
Well, I think that's right. I think all the alleys have a number. I mean, that's my assumption from dealing with alleys before. It's just a sequential thing. I don't think it's any significant.
I think they just assigned a number to it for identification purposes.
I believe that is correct, but I'll validate for tomorrow night.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, item PH2A is an ordinance making appropriations for the city budget to the general fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020. This is a public hearing only. PH2B is an ordinance making appropriations for city budget to the grants, projects, financial plans, enterprise funds, debit service fund, and a special tax district for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020. Also another public hearing only. And then PH2C is an ordinance making appropriations for city budget to the capital project funds for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020. Also another public hearing only. Yes, sir, Mr. Grady.
Any changes from our previous presentations?
Mr. Manager.
Not at this point, sir.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Cheatham, where did we end up? Obviously, I'm amazed that we can even do a budget in this, all the circumstances we have surrounding us and unknowns, but where did we end up with, we talked about doing more for paving locally, that issue was, where do we end up with that?
The recommended budget that you'll be having the hearing on tomorrow night does include an increase in our ability to resurface streets in the city. And I see Ms. Laura Mortel, our budget director there. She probably can give you more specifics than I can.
That'd be awesome.
You'll have to forgive me. You'll have to repeat the question. I was walking in the hallway.
Essentially, we had a lot of discussion last, I don't know, six months about, the local, our streets and different possibilities. We were obviously looking at trying to do another kind of transportation thing, but bond, but we put that off. What were we left with in this budget? What are you putting forth as our best case solution under the circumstances?
Currently in the budget, we moved money, I believe it was $2 million from streets rehab in the future years to this year. So they have money that they can continue that effort. We have an asphalt crew that is budgeted for 6 months out of the year in stormwater, in public services. And in stormwater, we have a pothole crew also budgeted.
So there's a new asphalt crew.
There is a new asphalt crew.
And then you have the pothole. That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Redmore.
With regard to the situation that the NCDOT is in financially, has our power bill allocations been altered, changed, withheld? Are we still getting our power bill twice a year?
Currently in the budget, it was budgeted at full. I was just in receipt, I believe on Friday, of some information saying that it may go down 25%. And that has not been reflected in the budget.
The 25% reduction that may happen is not reflected in the budget?
I believe it was 25%. I'll have to get that for you by Friday. Was it?
Okay.
Berlin's validating the 25%.
Well, do you have any idea, but I know I'm putting you on the spot, but in terms of 25%, what does that equate to in terms of dollars?
I'm completely guessing. I think it's around 1.6 million or 2 million. So I'm assuming it's about 250 to 500,000, maybe less than that.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
One more question. Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
So we have another budget session on Friday, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's like our last bite at this.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. That brings us to our ordinances. One is an ordinance approving supplemental appropriation of $65,781 to the Building Improvement Capital Fund Building Maintenance Project for insurance proceeds and interest earnings received. Questions? O2 is an ordinance making appropriations of $107,599 to the Building Improvement Capital Fund for the Wellington Fire Station Improvements Project. Okay. Resolutions. R1 is a resolution declaring a continuing state of emergency in the city of Wilmington. And then reports. RP1 is council's appointments committees for boards and commissions. And the mayor pro tem will be giving us a report from that particular committee. Are there any items to be brought forward this time, Mr. Manager?
Yes, sir. We have 3 items to discuss with you, if appropriate, Ms. Mayor. One has to do with providing an update on the land development code, recommending the language, particularly for administrative items. The presenter for that item, the LDC update, is out ill, so we're going to have to reschedule that presentation for you, but it was scheduled for today. The next item we have on the agenda, we want to spend some time with you regarding the sidewalk improvements that are scheduled for Wrightsville Avenue. And Mr. Moten will introduce that item, followed by upgrades that are planned for Bijou Park. Mr. Carter will address that item. So if it's okay with you, we'll proceed next to the improvements scheduled for Wrightsville Avenue. Mr. Moten will address that item.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. This is the second 2014 transportation bond item that we're briefing on today. Riceville Avenue Sidewalks and Roundabout project. Matt Hypes, construction project manager, will make this presentation. And we wanted to just give you some advance notice about the impacts. That's a very complicated area to construct sidewalks. Matt.
Good morning. I'm here to discuss the tree preservation and proposed removals along the sidewalk alignment for the Wrightsville Ave Sidewalks and Roundabout project. This first slide shows a length of the project corridor from up around Wilshire Boulevard out to Hawthorne Drive. It's approximately 2.5 miles. And please recall that this is a combination of 3 transportation bond projects and will provide continuous sidewalk from Independence Boulevard out to Hawthorne Drive. We'll also include a roundabout at Wallace Avenue and signalized pedestrian crossings at the key intersections. Currently, the design is around 75%. As we are working through the design on projects of this nature, some of the key priorities include providing safe pedestrian connections, minimizing right-of-way acquisition, minimizing utility impacts, and also avoiding and preserving trees to the extent possible. One of the big challenges for this project was choosing what side of the road to construct the sidewalk on. Our consultant for the project, Clark Nexon, conducted a feasibility study prior to design to help determine the best alignment by working to find that balance between safety, right-of-way acquisition, utility impacts, and everything else that we have to contend with. With this being such a long corridor, there were stretches where, one side of the road may be more beneficial from an aspect of utilities or right-of-way, but to cross back and forth, you sacrifice safety and pedestrian convenience. So a big factor that went into deciding the side of the road to be on were the Wave bus stops. There are 6 along this corridor, all located on the north side of the road. So with all things considered, the recommendation was to keep the sidewalk on the north side of the road for the entire corridor. And as you know, there are a great deal of trees along this project corridor. And so as soon as design was started, we engaged the city arborist, Aaron Reese, to help things along. And we've walked the project several times as design has progressed to take a look at the sidewalk alignment with respect to trees, while also evaluating the trees themselves. To minimize impacts to the root systems of these key trees that we are retaining, we are planning to use an alternate sidewalk and driveway material that is flexible and porous. It will allow water and oxygen to continue to get to the roots of these trees. Another thing, Aaron has participated in the design discussions and follow-ups with the consultant throughout this process. So it's been a serious consideration as from the very beginning. Prior to making these decisions to remove these trees, it's not something that is made lightly. One of the first things we were looking at was the types of trees and their condition, evaluating options to shift the sidewalk one way or the other to get around them, and then also this evaluation of these alternate materials to help protect these trees. Some next steps. We look forward to resuming public outreach in some capacity in the near future. And part of those discussions will involve potential tree removals along the frontage of some of these properties on this project corridor. And sometimes homeowners may choose to relocate some of the smaller trees that may be possibly in the way, well in advance of construction. So as the project progresses, we're continually working to minimize these tree impacts as we work toward final design. And also Parks has indicated that there will be opportunities following construction to replant trees through this area. Just a couple other items of note. This presentation focuses on key trees along the proposed sidewalk alignment. Does not include each and every tree. And it's also, we're still in design. So although there are no significant changes anticipated at this time with respect to trees, the extent of removals and preservation is not yet final. But we just wanted to go ahead and start this discussion before we get to final design. So with that said, the following slide provides a summary of key trees to be removed along this corridor. And after this section, we will also highlight some of the trees that we are preserving and how we were able to do that. So as you can see from this table, the vast majority of key trees to be removed were also noted as having poor health by the city arborist. So some of these are very large mature trees that may look beautiful as you're driving by, but actually have some health conditions and could be issues in the relatively near future. So we'll scroll through the photos, and if there's any that y'all would like to stop and discuss, just please let me know.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
I thought the term poor health was a little vague. Are we talking about trees that are nearing the end of their natural life, that they're going to have to come down? Or are we just saying there's something wrong with it and someday they have to come down? It's a little vague.
Yep, I will let Aaron Reese discuss that in more detail.
I like that to be part of the public presentation when this comes up to us, so everybody hears that we're not taking, for the most part, we're not taking down healthy trees. These are trees that, some prediction of how long they would still have the stand before we'd have to take them down.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Yes, good morning. That is a very good question. With only a couple of exceptions, the majority of the trees that will have to be removed for this project, the ones that we were deemed in the poor health category, quite a few of them, if this project did not happen at all, would likely survive a few more years. But they are in the state of health that they're currently in with any type of construction around them, whether it's traditional sidewalk construction or the non-traditional porous material. Any type of construction would kind of push them over the edge to the point where if we did leave them, the construction around them would probably finish them off within just a couple of years, and then we would have to very quickly take down trees that we had planned and designed around. It's a lot of the health issue. There's compaction issues. So there's damage to the root systems on a lot of these trees. Some of them, the health has declined due to hurricane damage. Some have been hit by vehicles. Some have I think a couple of trees that have a slight storm damage lean. So they're leaning over the roadway. So it would be beneficial to go ahead and take those out before they fall into the roadway. So there's a kind of a little bit of a range of factors that are affecting the health of the trees. But of all the trees that we are removing, all of them have some pretty significant health issues. All the healthy trees along this corridor, with the exception of a handful of very small trees, any of the trees of any decent, significant size are being retained and saved.
And do we have, as part of the budget of this project, the replanting of trees, or is that in a separate budget?
It is not, as far as I know, it's not in the budget with this project, but it would fall under the Parks and Trees Department's annual tree planting. We would just incorporate that into our annual planning everywhere. When we normally find locations that need trees, we would just roll this into that. So it's not specifically part of this budget.
But will there be locations along Wrightsville Avenue where trees can be replanted?
Yes, sir. There will. We don't know exactly. We don't have an account on that number yet, but there will be opportunity to replant trees along this corridor.
I think it's going to be important to replace as many trees as we can along Wrightsville.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I know in the years going back 10, 12 years, there have been a number of people who have called every one of us on council with a tree issue. And I've personally visited some of those trees, and they were, I deal with these kinds of issues at the cemetery, and trees do look healthy, like you just mentioned, Mr. Reese. And when they finally come down, the entire core is nothing but it almost looks like mud. It's just nothing there. But they put out leaves, they look healthy. But I've seen instances where the city has refused to let people take a tree down that so badly needed it. And now I look at this list, and we've got trees in poor health that are going to come down. And I agree with Kevin, that's kind of a broad stroke of the brush, just saying poor health. Nothing speaks more volumes about a city than to let a sidewalk go around a tree instead of taking the tree down. It just lets people know that you care that much about trees. So anything that I'm going to walk this route, I meant to do it over the weekend. And because you're right, there are a lot of significant trees there. And when we come back in with a 2-inch caliper tree or even greater than that, it's going to take a while for it to get the canopy back. So I just would like to do everything in our power to maintain those beautiful trees along there. And I was real pleased to see that some of them, ones that I'm very familiar with, are going to be saved. But we need to be consistent across the board and save everything we can. I applaud the sidewalk. It's been needed for years. So I know when we made Wrightsville Avenue one way from 17th Street out to Castle, where it used to be two-way, there was no way we could keep it two-way and save some of those trees, so we made it one-way. And I think we won some national awards for that design and saving those trees. But I know that trees are like humans. They have a life expectancy as well. So they are that bad, they need to come down. But anything that we can save, I would certainly encourage that.
Yes, and will apologize a little bit for the vagueness of the poor health category in this. It is kind of a catch-all, just to avoid having to list out all of the technical aspects of the decline in health in these particular trees. So it is a little bit of a catch-all, and it is a little bit vague. But I think with the working through the design of this project, I think we have staff and the consultant and everything. I think we have done a pretty good job of avoiding any trees that are in good health that can be saved, that would not already suffer from construction, trees that are not already suffering. And you know, that design, along with any replanting that we can do, I think we'll be in very good shape after this project is finished.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll scroll through some of these photos. If you see anything that you'd like to stop and discuss, please, just let me know. Start now.
Can you go back to that last one?
Sir, right button. Yes.
If this is a city tree in the city right away, that wisteria or whatever it is growing up that tree, that was a kiss of death the day it was allowed to grow up. That tree could be as healthy as any tree in Wilmington had those vines been cut away from it. They just choked the life out of it, especially a pine tree. Just a comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. These, we may likely be able to save these trees if that the sidewalk can remain here. We're just trying to get it uncovered right now to confirm, but just some of these, like I said, it's not finalized in design, so some of these we will be saving as many as possibly can. This one split was already noted to come down, probably prior to construction, where the trunk was split and leaning toward the road, but it's obviously a great looking tree, but unfortunate. This one can likely be saved too. We're hoping. It's kind of small, but we can get around it. But it was noted in the plans to come out. This is the last one. So I'm on to tree preservation. Touched on before. We were able to shift the sidewalk in many locations to get around these key trees. At some points we would install curb and gutter to get between the tree and the road itself, or expand the plaza to go around the back side of them. We're able to, some areas had some pretty wide right of way out there, so we just gave us some room to work. And then also, as in most cases on these trees being preserved, we're also going to put in the flexible porous sidewalk and driveways as well, where necessary, to protect those roots and allow the water and the oxygen and everything else to get to those roots. So, following is this summary with the associated photos. Oh, I'm sorry. There's the table first. So as you can see on these, on each one of these photos, include the snapshots from the 60% design plans, which was our last design milestone that we have reviewed, and they show the sidewalk alignment with respect to these trees and the section of the flexible porous of pavement section that we're proposing. So, see how we able to shift the sidewalk, through here to get around these things. So it will be pretty evident that we they took these measures to protect these things.
So I want to ask the question is, has this information been shared with the tree commission?
No, sir.
Well, as an advocacy group, and as we know how social media operates in today's world, as soon as these trees start coming down, you're going to have a lot of tree experts out there that will be making some commentary about this. And I think it's only smart if we would at least contact them and explain to them, because I know a lot of those people that are on that committee are very well versed in tree health, and to share with them what we are doing. Since they're an advocacy group, they're connected to a lot of folks in the community that will have a lot of comments about trees. And for the average person that doesn't get into the minutia of this, where we're getting the information firsthand, they take it upon themselves just to make commentary that we're just cutting trees down. So I just think it would be a good idea, first of all, to make sure that we have some discussion with them, with our tree arborists, who I know has a good relationship with their chairperson, as well as the Alliance for Trees, so they can at least understand from an advocacy position what we are doing. So when they get comments or they get things shared with them, they have some basis to be able to defend the city's position, as well as making certain that in some way, shape, or form that the public understands what we're doing here. And I would like to have a much more thorough evaluation, not a thorough evaluation, but a discussion or an explanation to the community in some way, shape, or form. And we have some pretty savvy people now that are dealing with social media, so they prepare themselves for this kind of onslaught, because this is a large area and it's going to take down a lot of trees that do look very healthy, that are going to be replaced or taken down. But I think that we need to be ahead of this and not react to it. So those are some concerns that I have. And as elected officials, we'll get blown up with this, with a lot of misinformation. So I just want to make sure that we're making certain that the community knows, and the advocacy groups that are supporting the community, like the Tree Commission, has a very thorough understanding of this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, can we get this sent to us, email?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this will actually have that. That wasn't shown on the plan here, but this section here will have the flexible porous sidewalk as well along this tree. You know, we're behind the tree at this location. That. Questions?
Any questions? Any further questions from anybody? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Mr. Chin.
Mr. Mayor, the last presentation is an update on Bijou Park improvements. Mr. Tony Carter will address that item.
Good morning, folks. I want to start this morning by saying up front that I'd like to show appreciation to Mike McClickey and his staff for putting this presentation together. You've got me doing the presentation simply because this is not necessarily great news. So whenever it's bad news, I try to bring it to you myself. This is update on the Bijou Park improvements. I'm going to try to figure out how to use this. You got it? Okay, never mind. Thank you. Just a quick update as to how we're going to go through this. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about the project area. Then we're going to talk about the project background, just to give you a refresher on this. Many of you will remember it. Talk about the budget, then we'll take some questions. So you will recall the Bijou Park improvements are critical to some work that was going on downtown, specifically in connection for River Place to Front Street. This is the connector that will do that. We also have the elevated walkway that goes behind River Place and connects over to the extension of Chestnut. And we have some forthcoming improvements on Front Street that will also be an improvement in the area that will tie into the whole project. Also, just as a note, we're doing some work in the alley across the street. So there's a real convergence here of projects that kind of bring a connector from Front Street down to Water. Next, please. We had designed some, or shown you some preliminary designs and pictures with regard to what we might be doing in this area. You'll recall that we were going to do some landscaping, some pavers, lighting, going to try to do some seating and some amenities in the area. It was funded with the second CIP, which was the 80-20 plan, 5-year plan. And it was designed to be coordinated with all those projects that we had just shown you in the previous slide. The expectation was to construct the improvements in Bijou at the same time that the contractor was working on River Place, and used the same contractors and subcontractors through that process. We've gotten some bids back in the process that we just really don't think are going to allow us to follow that project timeline. Next, please. So just as an update, the initial project was budgeted at about $550,000. We've already spent $71,000 of that in design, which leaves us round numbers, $479,000 for the project. We knew that we were probably going to come up a little bit short, so we talked with our folks in finance. We identified in addition to an additional $350,000 in CIP funding that would have been available for appropriation effective July 1. That would have given us a total of about $900,000 for the project, total project cost. The initial designer estimates for the improvements were about $780,000. We did some in-house analysis that showed that those costs may be as high as $960,000. You'll note that in 960, we were in the ballpark and could have worked our way through the process. Next slide, please. This is the project, a listing of the project costs that we got when we put the bid out, or put the request out to the contractor. You'll note that the bottom line, which is 1.65 million, is considerably over the project budget of $900,000. That breaks down into about $1 million for the construction base, almost 1.1 million for the construction base. The alternates that we had shown you before, which include pavers, raised planter, a green wall, an entry feature, some cube seating, and some decorative screening, came in at about $310,000, almost $311,000. The developer fee for the project was about $56,000. The contingency of about $145,000. Total construction contract of $1.6. And then we had some costs outside of that contract, including some CFPUA costs, some power sourcing costs, material testing, those kinds of things that added about $55,000, which brought us to a total of almost $1.7 million for the full scope of construction, 1.65. So the deficit that we had, the construction bid with the alternates was 1.65, as I just noted. Available funds, this is the 900,000 less the design costs that were already have already been allocated, left us needing about $822,000 to do the entire project as originally scoped with alternates. Next slide, please. So what happens if we go without the alternates? We have the base bid of almost 1.1 million. The alternates are removed. The developer fee goes down to about $43,000, and contingency winds up at about $113,000. Total construction contract of about 1.2 million with the outside $55,000 outside construction cost. Almost $1.3 million, remembering that we have available about 829,000, excuse me. So here's what it looks like without the alternates. 1.3 million for the revised construction bid, less the funds. We wind up with a deficit of about $467,000. You'll go back, please. You'll note that the city staff does not recommend going ahead with this project. It was very difficult to make the decision to come back before you and tell you that we didn't want to go ahead with this project at this point in time. But we could not, in all honesty, come back and ask for an additional doubling of this budget so we could make this project happen as we'd originally scoped it. We do believe that project costs are going down. We have already seen one bid project that has come in under what we anticipated in terms of budget. We do have another street project, as I noted earlier in the presentation. We have the Front Street improvements projects that will be coming forward to you in the spring. We'd prefer not to wait for that project just because of the amount of time that will elapse between when River Place is open and when that project might actually be done. So what we'd like to ask is that council bear with us and let us go back out for bid towards the end of the summer. We believe some of the construction costs will come down. We were using a sole source bidder here as a result of the extension of some of the work that's already been done in the area. And we believe that if we take it out at the end of what we think is going to be a pretty significant recession, or in a pretty significant recession, we may be able to get some additional bids that will be more favorable to the city. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have. Also have Mike Naklicki in the other room if you get into the specifics of it.
I guess just to clarify, you're saying earlier on the bids we were taking were from people that are working on, sounded like all.
Yes, sir. These are the same people that are doing the workforce. They are the subcontractors.
So we haven't put it out to more of an open bid.
We have not. We had anticipated that without MOB and demob costs, since they were already working in Grace and Chestnut, that we would get a better bid. I'm not sure that that's the case.
Right. And like you already covered the other part, just maybe waiting just even a matter of months may be a big difference.
Yes, sir. Again, we're already seeing some reduction or some prices coming in below what we anticipated in budget, which is not something we've seen in quite a long time. And we believe if we wait a few months, get to the end of the summer, we may see a better opportunity.
Tony, if we hold back on this project as far as connecting Bijou with the Water Street project,
yes, sir,
that's not going to be a problem.
That's what
that will not be a problem. I mean, the connection will happen, or we're going to have a continued separation.
The connection will be there, and we will have to expend some of the project funds to be able to do that. For example, not project funds. We have to expend some other funds to be able to do that. There's a retaining wall that needs to be fixed before we can affect the transfer from one property to the other. Having said that, yes, you will have an access through there. It just will not be as nice as what we anticipate once the project is complete.
And if you bring in another contractor to complete that work, sometimes contractors will blame other contractors, saying, well, if that person would have done this differently, I could have made this connection better and all that kind of stuff. They use that tactic a lot. This being a total almost separate piece of property that's adjacent to this property, do you anticipate any of those kind of problems happening if after these contractors pull off the job, another contractor come in and finishing that?
You should fire me if I told you no to that. Yes, sir. We do anticipate those types of problems and hope that we'll be able to overcome them. I think it's clear that the budget is going to be stretched at best, but just to come back to you and ask for at least $500,000 more and potentially $750,000 more just seemed irresponsible at this point in time. We just have to overcome those at that point in time.
Thank you. Mr. O'Grady?
I just want to express my agreement with you, Tony, that those numbers are ridiculous. There's no way we should be spending that much. But I think it's important that at least there be an opening so people can enjoy that walk through to the stairway. I think that's going to be very important.
Absolutely. And I've asked the engineering staff to go ahead and make sure that the connection that's actually to the elevated walkway, if at all possible, be the finished connection so that we'll only be dealing with the improvements in Bijou Park. I know that sounds a lot easier than it probably is in application, but they've at least got what we'd like to see, and hopefully they'll be able to make some of it come true.
Any other questions, comments?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Tony. Okay, this concludes this agenda. Are there any items to be brought forward by our city staff? Okay. Anybody? In the Hollywood squares?
Stay safe.
Y'all be safe. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody. With that, we stand adjourned.